Alrighty. I've been cranking out videos lately and need a bit of a breather. I have heaps of stuff in the works, including the Dead Money video that people have requested, but in the meantime, I figured it'd be a good opportunity to finally talk about something I've been meaning to for ages. My experience in the games industry, reflecting on how that whole thing went down, and what a shit show game dev is at the moment. Quick aside, but I just want to take a moment and thank everyone again who's jumped on board recently. This channel rocketed over 1,000 subscribers in a couple of days, and I appreciate it. Although I'm still going to make videos and talk about whatever I feel like regardless, it's cool to know that we've carved out a little niche here. Even if you don't agree, that's also fine. I don't really want you to. These videos are food for thought, and if there's one takeaway from this stuff, it's important to engage with everything critically. It'd be nice to have a break from editing, so I'll probably just chuck up some B-roll from various games on screen. Feel free to listen to this in the background. This isn't going to be super structured. I'll try my best to cover everything I can, but if there's something relevant, I'll try and get something up on screen. One last thing, if you're not interested in sticking around for a behind the scenes style thing, I've got 2 bits of advice for everyone watching this video. First, there are 100 times more people trying to break into the industry right now than there are jobs available. Second, if you absolutely want to get into game dev, stay independent and do it yourself. Indie dev is something we won't cover here per se. While it comes with challenges of its own, it's worth it for the creative and financial freedom you'll have. It's not going to be easy, but it's better than the alternative. Trust me. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into it. As much as I would like to tell you that my time in the industry was as some bigwig creative director type that got to have entire teams under my supervision, that I got to work on my dream games or make whatever I wanted, that each day in the office was like the Wolf of Wall Street, that wasn't the case at all. I wasn't a nepo baby like that Jason, whatever his name is, the pirate software guy that everyone's been going off at lately. I was at the very bottom of the corporate ladder. I worked really hard at uni. For the record, I specialized in game design and production, but I'd be the first to admit I hate anything to do with management or paperwork, and I always have, so obviously gravitated towards design. I'm a generalist in art and programming, even though it's been years since I opened Unity. Wouldn't exactly say I could do much with either, beyond the hacky approach to get it working. The way courses are taught, particularly around game loops and what I'd call the reductive approach to game design, is something I'd like to talk about one day. But I don't want to get off track going down a million rabbit holes. Long story short, I thought I could essentially brute force my way into the industry, or at least keep doing hobbyist stuff on the side if that didn't pan out, or start an indie team with some people I knew to keep building up a portfolio. But looking back on my time as a game developer, it was a waste of time and money. I regret ever getting into it, but obviously there's no point trying to change the past. By the way, if you think this is an excuse for me to get all weepy about the good old days, or wondering why I keep going on about myself, this is context for everything we're going to get to in a bit. I should also make it clear that I won't be naming any names or studios, so on the off chance someone I know does see this video, I'd appreciate it if you don't dox me either. Basic decency is lacking right now, and that's not just in game development. By the end of the course, I was insanely lucky to land a job, a paid internship specifically, which is pretty common for most studios to pick up new blood for cheap. I was able to work my way up a little bit from there, but in the overall hierarchy, I was probably seen to be even lesser than the usually outsourced QA folks that most studios tend to look down on. Treat your playtesters nicely. Same goes with community managers. They're just doing their job, same as everyone else. I was not special. The longest gig I had was on a live service hellscape that cranked out dates on the regular, and there was no opportunity for creativity beyond that. I certainly tried to bring the kind of writing and character personalities I've done for RPGs into it, but I was, for all intents and purposes, at the bottom of the barrel, a cog in the machine. You would be assigned work, attend daily stand-up, or scrums as they're called, where each team member would describe what they've done and how a new feature or bug report was going, for example, and then you'd be left to get to it. It's really not that different from a typical boring office job. At the end of a few 2-week sprints that would result in an update, you'd reset and then do the exact same thing all over again. On some level, I was aware of this going in, but like many people starting out in any industry, the idea was to build up from there. This gig lasted for a few years, until eventually I was chewed up and spat out like the expendable trash the majority of studios treat people as. And that was pretty much that. I'd done some stuff personally, also indie if you want to call it that, but that was it. There were no awards, no tearful goodbyes, no industry-defining masterpieces or interviews with games media. They didn't even have the decency to wait until I was gone before the guy brought in to replace me started. Less than 5 years and I was done. That is hardly unique to game dev, and I'm absolutely not trying to make myself out as some martyr that poor me or whatever, or that game developers have it so tough that anyone in any industry should be placed on a pedestal. This was just my experience specific to gaming. What a fucking waste. Technically, I should have taken them to what's called the Fair Work Commission here in Australia at the time because I was exploited and not paid what I should have been after the internship period ended, only to be then told I wasn't being renewed as soon as I asked about it, but by that point, I was just so done with it all. I'd also rocked the boat, which led to some funny stories for another day, so I'd like to think I left with a bit of a middle finger. Anyway, I sank into depression for a while as I tried my luck at a few other studios, but it eventually brought me out of the industry entirely, and I've been working various part-time jobs in the years since. If you made it this far and I haven't bored you to death, I wanted to be honest and lay out everything before we get into it further. Also, it's partly to dispel the idea that I'm an expert in anything, really. The fact I was in game development at one stage doesn't really mean anything. I'm just some guy on the internet, and if videos of me sharing my opinion has ever come across in a way like I was objectively correct or somehow better than anyone else, that was not my intention. Being a game dev doesn't automatically make you important or an authority. It's not some special badge. If you want to argue semantics, hitting play in a game engine technically makes you a developer. I just wanted to make that clear, and that I've never tried to pretend like I'm some kind of big shot like David Jaffe who goes from one blunder to the next, or a nepo baby like Pirate Software, or Randy Pitchford with untold eldritch horrors on his USB. Again, I was at the very, very bottom of the corporate ladder and completely unimportant. There is no big secret, no source of wisdom across the ages. I was disposable trash. Now it's time to tell you about what's going on behind the scenes. First of all, I should hammer home that what I'm about to go over was obviously coloured by my experience. There are plenty of devs, I imagine, that have a wonderful time. They've worked with lovely people, the old hats that have been there for decades and worked on amazing projects, just as there will be people who have been put through far worse, endured horrific conditions. Again, that's not unique to game dev. Not everyone is perfect, not everyone is evil incarnate, left-wing, right-wing, woke, conservative, or whatever words you want to use. This is my 2 cents, and you can take it or leave it for whatever it's worth. Anyway, I'll stop banging on about it now. I just want this to be crystal bloody clear because I just know the kind of comments this video will get. Let's keep going. In one of the videos from last year, I talked about a phenomenon I called the club. Now that I finally have a chance to elaborate on it further, let's talk about how the pipeline works. From pretty much the beginning of a course, students are explicitly taught that networking and connections is basically essential if you want to get anywhere. You are required to get a Twitter account and start ingratiating yourself into spaces that make no effort to accommodate you. They don't have to, per se. Networking is something that's hardly unique to game dev, but if you want to get anywhere, you have to suck up to the people at the top, the people already working inside studios, the people with friends who know friends who know friends, HR or recruitment if you're really lucky. Worst of all is the people in bed with games media or acting as media themselves. I refuse to legitimize them as journalists, but you get the idea. Why is this a problem? Well, the status quo is why the games industry is currently stagnating, that the same people are in the same positions and everyone is making the same design by committee slop. That's obviously a problem, but where things really hit the fan is the environment this cultivates. Imagine for a moment that you're one of the few people at the top of this hierarchy. You're successful. Maybe you even have some kind of production or creative position in an indie or AAA studio, and you have all this prospective talent coming in a few times a year, suddenly following your socials, bumping into you at conventions or meetups. Part of this may very well be friendship, but they are trying to use you as much as you are them. The relationship is inherently inherently transactional. You have the opportunity to open some doors for them perhaps, and whether you want to admit it or not, you will consciously choose those who appeal to you or have done something for you already compared to some Joe Schmo who's just walked in off the street. Maybe it's their skin color, their ethnicity, sexual preferences, or style of clothing that draws you to them at first. It's okay, it's human nature, we naturally form preferences, but what happens when the same kind of person is the only one coming through the door? I cannot overstate just how awful it is that as a culture, game development relies on students sucking up to the people who have already hit the big time if they're ever going to make it. It's not impossible, of course, that someone could do it without this. I was never particularly good at networking, and I've said before that I'm a massive introvert, so never went to any of these embarrassing, sycophantic bar mates or union gatherings, but that is very, very much the exception. I was never part of the club regardless, and thank God I wasn't. Considering where I was within the system, I wasn't exactly primed to start an industry renaissance anyway. If you do make it into the industry, and that is a very big if, you'll now be part of the same status quo that you just spent months or years sucking up to. Now you get to enjoy the benefits, so you will naturally fall in with the party line, and you will not rock the boat, lest you incur the wrath of 1,000 retweets. Being part of the club brings with it exclusive privileges. Even after everything we've talked about, this is what disgusts me the most. To be part of the club means that you are elevated above the rest. You become one of the many who move through the same circles at PAX, GDC, Comic-Con, and so forth, and you'll be invited by the rest to continue to uphold what is essentially game dev's equivalent of the elite. And if you do something terrible, if you're an absolutely toxic piece of shit, you physically, verbally, hell, even sexually abuse your fellow developers, or friends or family in your life, it doesn't get commented on. That only really happens if it's something very, very extreme. Similar to what we observed with Me Too, high-profile cases or throwing the masses a bone every now and then might go public, but the people staying silent, closing ranks, and refusing to actually live up to the values they espouse are those within the club. Fittingly, they're the ones being appointed as panelists at conventions, speakers at GDC or GCAT, hosts on awards nights. Do you really think it's a coincidence that so many people think, talk, act the same way? Indie devs, and I'm not talking about two guys in a shed somewhere or a couple trying to cobble something together, but actual studios are the worst of this. I don't want to get into the political side of things per se. The fact these people generally fall in the same camp of appearance, behavior, and whatnot is not so much the point as their sheer hypocrisy. I'd be saying the same damn thing regardless of their political or religious beliefs. The occasions I personally witness people I knew getting up on Twitter or whatever for some moral grandstanding, only to strangely go quiet the moment someone they were close to was called out, that cone of silence was very, very telling. Honestly, the club is worth a whole video just on its own, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of the toxic culture within game dev, but hopefully this gives people on the outside some idea. It's disgusting. If you don't have a moral backbone to stand by what you believe in, then don't pretend you do. Don't pretend to be working for a better, more inclusive industry when you're the exact same as the million other narcissists willing to climb over a mountain of bodies to get where you are. You don't care, and don't fool yourself into thinking you do. Own up to it and admit it. Game dev is fucked, but it's not just the people behind them. Another factor in why the industry is so screwed right now, both as an artistic medium and the people, generally speaking, making them, is because it has become so goddamn resistant to change. Why this is happening is a classic case of the chicken or the egg. I'm sure you've seen this kind of thing before. The sign out the front of a cafe or restaurant saying "Experience staff wanted," but how are you supposed to get experience if you're not even going to get the chance to get experience? To put this into perspective, the big auto game devs that people talk about today, Ken Levine was 30 around the time he was working on Thief 1 and System Shock 2. Hideo Kojima was in his mid-20s as the director on Snatcher and the original Metal Gear. John Romero and John Carmack were in their early 20s working on Doom. Todd Howard was game director on Redguard and then Morrowind before he was even 30. The list goes on. To compare that to the industry of today, it's almost unheard of. To be that high up in the leadership, especially creative creative roles is near impossible. Either you'd have to luck out through forming your own team or studio and getting funding from there, or you're 1 in a billion to get promoted so young. This does not, and frankly cannot, happen in modern studios. You have to wait your turn in line like everyone else. Like many industries are experiencing right now, the people who once enjoyed the benefits of flat structures and either little experience or lucky breaks are the exact same ones who have now implemented the slow corporate slog to climb the ladder. In most studios now, to even be considered for a senior design position, you'd have to have at least 10 years of experience and shipped multiple games, and don't even think about creative director, studio head. Is this what game development is to be now? We're heading the same way as the Catholic Church, that you have to be nigh on the Pope's age to be considered for a senior position in a studio? The knock-on effects from this are immeasurable. If these same people, old, young, white, black, man, woman, straight, queer, whatever, are the ones essentially sitting at the top and refusing to let new blood in to innovate, to even get the slightest chance at what they themselves enjoyed, is it any wonder that most creative mediums have stagnated? Want to know why art has been replaced with homogenized slop? Well, there's your answer. This leads into one of the greatest grifts of all. Narrative consultants. Much has been said about Sweet Baby already, but separate from the agenda, real or not, that they're trying to push, what's more telling about these consultancy groups is essentially their effort to bypass the qualification obstacle. I know it's almost too easy at this point to keep coming back to Dragon Age the Veilguard because it's the lowest possible hanging fruit. Corinne Bush, the game director for Veilguard, spent 20 years at EA working on golf games and licensed shovelware crap. They had zero experience as a game director, let alone RPGs, but apparently The Sims qualifies you for Dragon Age. Similarly, John Epler, the creative director for the franchise, was a cinematic artist with zero experience in any directorial capacity, but apparently qualified him for the role and allowed him to step into a writing position with no prior experience. You can thank him for the quirky Disney abomination that is Ballara. There's also Patrick Weeks, with the most vain, insufferable character ever written, Tush, that was his embarrassing mouthpiece, and OC, as he or they or whatever came out as non-binary during development, but that's another story. BioWare really is singular in how much they've slurped down the Kool-Aid, but the reason I bring this up is because narrative consultants are no different. According to her LinkedIn profile, Kim Belair used to work at Ubisoft and somehow stepped up from a community management position to a writing role during this period. Interestingly, when she left Ubisoft in 2018, this just so happened to coincide with the founding of Sweet Baby, and her work in a narrative capacity skyrocketed from there. It is my genuine belief that Belair, Kindred, and all the other diversity hires, literally, that's their entire shtick as consultancy groups, is that they realized they did not have the talent or the patience to work their way up through the industry like the rest. For this reason, they instead decided to leverage their identity, victim status, and the shift in the cultural zeitgeist over the past 10 years or so to essentially con their way into positions higher than they could ever possibly attain. The results of this speak for themselves. It's honestly hilarious how so often these consultancy groups who are hired with the specific purpose of not offending ironically end up reinforcing racist stereotypes. Bray from Forspoken is a petty criminal who doesn't have a father and loves her shoe collection. The main character from Dustborn sits at the back of the bus, but that speaks to these groups' astounding lack of self-awareness. They leverage their status as victims, which, as I've spoken about before, then makes them immune to all criticism because everyone is afraid of being called out as an ist or phobe, or worst of all, face litigation through discrimination laws, even though these are the exact same people now discriminating against other people who do not fit their worldview, the same way they criticize the industry once did to them. It's pure hypocrisy, and it's disgraceful. Maybe this comes across as a tinfoil hat moment, or that I've gone full mask off, or whatever, that you think I'm actually this conniving right-wing lunatic, and thus prove you're doing the same thing as these people the moment they're criticized. But don't just trust me. Let's hear it from Kim Belair herself.
Put this stuff up to your higher-ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
Or a certain YouTuber who's written for Polygon in the past and worked in a consultancy group on the Silent Hill 2 remake. I'm not going to name him because I'm not interested in starting some petty internet beef, but go watch my recent video if you want to hear me rip into Bloober Team for their arrogance in modernizing one of the best and most important games ever made. Or that borderline parody who worked on Concord and insisted everyone called her Professor, even though she has no accreditation or relevance whatsoever. The delusion on display to be so far detached from reality and that self-absorbed is just unreal. Getting into bed with games media and arguably the even more disgusting grift of influencer culture is bad enough, but this is actively damaging the work environment and the final product from the get-go. Narrative and sensitivity consultants are con artists who have essentially bullied their way into creative positions and defile franchises and art with messaging that's about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face. These people are hacks. They always were hacks, and it wouldn't matter if they were far left, far right, whatever. The effect this has had on modern writing speaks for itself. The various traits or identity of a person doesn't matter at all to me. What should matter is their talent, expertise, and suitability to a job. Chris Avallone, for example, is one of my favourite writers, but he's not infallible. He's done some iffy work over the years, but also worked on KOTOR 2, New Vegas, Divinity Original Sin, Prey, and so on. He has also just recently returned from false allegations that tried to ruin his life. This is how contentious and weaponized the debate has become. Point is, the color of your hair or the flags you put in your Twitter bio shouldn't have any impact on whether you're hired. I just know someone's gonna say that because I'm some lanky, completely average white guy means I must be seething or envious or whatever, but I'm not even in the industry anymore, remember? I have nothing to gain by speaking about this. It's to inform the rest of you that across industries, not just game dev, the old guard that these people criticize heavily is not being overthrown in some kind of romantic, glorious cultural revolution. It's just being replaced with another. How about, instead of more strong female characters or preachy mouthpieces, we write people, flaws and all. Attractive, ugly, young and old. Write characters that are believable with emotional depth. Modern writing is frankly depressing with how all-encompassing and how preachy, inauthentic and terrible it is. Less of Tash and more Kreia, Visa Smart, Commander Shepard, Arushale, Kuska, Farnese, Morrigan, Baconia, Elena, Yennefer, Ciri, Jack, Heather, Jill Valentine, Claire Redfield, Greyfax, Saint Celestine, Eowyn, Ripley, Lisbeth Salander, Sarah Connor, The Major. Characters to look up to and inspire. Let's stop focusing so much on who is writing, because what's more important is that it's good writing. That's essentially the broad strokes of what I wanted to cover. If you've made it this far, hopefully this video is worth something to people who are actively studying game dev or have had bad experiences of their own. Like I said, make of it what you will. To tie things out, I'll list off some smaller points that don't warrant their own section. With the rise of AI across industries, it doesn't bode well with the amount of inauthentic and insincere, hyper-commercialized shit that we're dealing with already. This is something I'll be covering in another video very soon with a script I've been working on, but specifically AI, game dev is going to suffer immensely for it. It's not just the dumb South Park meme about taking our jobs and whatnot, is that we've already seen what happens with algorithms trying to create worlds instead of the human touch. The empty, lifeless, if pretty vistas of No Man's Sky, the barren, soulless slop of Starfield, hell, even the amount of studios using it for PR or, embarrassingly, press releases. This ties back into what I mentioned at the beginning. As rough as indie dev may be, as much of a struggle you'll find it without millions of dollars behind you, it is your work made by your hands. To me, and clearly many other people, that matters far more than some bugs or being a little rough around the edges. I would take a noisy garage full of amateur musicians or hand-drawn artwork with some iffy proportions any day over the uncanny, meaningless slop that a computer can shit out. But I'm getting off track. This one's more for indie devs, but they'll level of naivety from people who might just be starting to mess around in game dev for the first time is a big problem. There's this huge misconception that if you just work hard enough, you too can become the next Undertale, or Untitled Goose Game, or Stardew Valley, or Among Us. This is not the case. Please, please, please. You need to understand that you have to rein in your expectations if you're going to stay sane. The next big indie hit narrative conveniently ignores the million other games that didn't get a moment in the spotlight. Because Steam has monopolized PC gaming market and many games of varying quality are being released every day, the chances of you making it rich on the next big thing are like a drop in the ocean. It's not impossible, yes, but if you're really going to be in this for the long haul, it's important to realize enthusiasm is only going to get you so far. Like I once did with modding, you should be making stuff because you enjoy it, first and foremost, and that you actually want to. If any success or attention happens to come from that, great, but you're going to be miserable if you're just doing this for money or fame. I'm not trying to be harsh or shoot down people's dreams, but the indie scene really needs a reality check about how saturated it's become compared to the very few that ever make a substantial amount of money. There are also many great games and studios that, much like the greats of Lookinglass or Zelm, deliver masterpieces that ultimately aren't financially successful and they sadly go under, or they're cannibalized from the inside and the talent goes their separate ways. Big publishers like Take-Two, Ubisoft, and EA have survived for this long because they're so ruthless, and they play it safe by having a portfolio of IPs as a buffer for any losses. This is a small thing, but if you're one of the people trying to learn a game engine at the moment, don't waste your time on Unity and C# like I was trained in. You'll get way more opportunities with Unreal Engine. This has nothing to do with players' feelings about optimization and so forth, but very, very few studios were interested in hiring Unity developers even at the time I was trying to get into the industry, and Unreal has become exponentially more popular since then. Knowing the ins and outs of Unreal will open many doors for you than the alternatives, especially with that Blueprint visual scripting or whatever it's called. If you're indie or a hobbyist, then by all means keep using Godot or GameMaker or whatever, but despite all those fancy looking renders they put out, Unity is geared towards 2D. That's why the majority of their most popular games made on the engine are Metroidvanias. Like I said, small thing, but it's worth mentioning. Use whatever you're comfortable with. Finally, let's touch on analytics quickly. That might seem like a bit of a curveball, but it'll make sense in a minute. If you've ever had a pop-up when playing a game that asks if it's okay to send metrics or bug reports back to the developer, these aren't anything to worry about, and you should, if you are okay with it. I'm not saying that there aren't developers who try to do some dodgy shit with this stuff, especially around EULAs, but the industry is very, very metrics driven. Heat maps, choke points, all that stuff is poured over incessantly by everyone from designers to executives. The reason why this is relevant is because it feeds back into the culture of overly optimizing design and the idea that, collectively, the industry has basically fallen into a trap of missing the forest for the trees. At the studio I worked at, there were literally TVs on the walls, listing off everything from DAU for daily active users, daily concurrent users, average spend per user, maximum daily spend, metrics around whales, and all the other acronyms that I can't remember. Both as a business and a platform, gaming has become so obsessed with KPIs that it's why risk assessments are prioritized over actual creativity. The studio I worked at wasn't even particularly unique in this. It's very common to have an entire team dedicated to just analytics and overlap with QA, or at the very least hire a few people to focus on it if you're a small team. This also feeds back into what I've talked about before, that developers and publishers don't really care about reviews. What they care about is pure hard stats. They're getting fed by the machine. There are strengths and weaknesses to this. Just look at that infamous example of how Sony Santa Monica cited Darkside Phil being an idiot for how they designed content for God of War Ragnarok. But for as much as this may disempower the artists as much as the consumer's voice, it's also why I keep banging on about voting with your wallet. The most important metric in the industry, more than any stat, more than any one developer, is the profit margin that executives ultimately have to get up and justify to shareholders as they sweat over whether they're getting their $10 million bonus this financial year. If you want the industry to change, then stop buying crap. If you don't want things to just keep going on as they are, then stop flushing your money down the drain. If you complain after the fact when the company has already got your money, then it's pointless. They don't care. You are completely disposable to them. A cog in the machine. PR teams certainly go to great lengths to make out like they care. Look at CD Projekt for how they continue to dupe so many gutless, unthinking consumers, but they don't. Gaming, like many potential art forms, is becoming increasingly transactional, and microtransactions are an excellent example of how parasitic companies have become. If you don't want this to be the norm, then don't allow the transaction to occur in the first place. Whether or not you're a game dev, or a player, or some random guy on the street, I hope this has been beneficial to at least someone out there, and open people's eyes about what's happening behind the scenes. I was never important, and I'm still fundamentally the same person I was then as I am now. Just hanging around and sharing my equally unimportant opinions on the internet. I was never going to make it as a game writer or a narrative or quest designer as I'd hoped, but time grants perspective. Whether or not things will change, well, you have more power than you realize.